During my esteemed academic career, we had to do a book report at one point in high school. And I didn't really read very much. As you can tell, when you have a 0.83 grade point average, you don't do a whole heck of a lot of reading. But I like baseball a lot. And there was a book called 8 Men Out about the Black Sox scandal, the World Series team that was forced to forfeit some games because they were involved in fixing the World Series. And I decided to do a book report on that book because a movie came out. And I thought, I can just see the movie and I won't have to read the book. It'll be great. But I was broke, and I didn't have the money to see the movie. Movies were like $10 in 1988 or whatever. So what I did was I got the LA Times review of the movie, and I read it, and I put together everything that I thought the movie was about, which is everything that I thought the book was about, and I did a book report on the movie based on movie reviews. Does that make sense? And it was the first time I ever got a passing grade in my life, ever. Which tells you something about the academic rigor of the high school that I attended. With that theme in mind, and with the fact that we're in Hollywood, I thought I would talk about a movie that I've never seen either. When we think about environmental justice, and there's a lot of movie themes coming up on the screen here, there's a reference to The Godfather and a couple of Pirates of the Caribbean. When we think about movies and we think about environmental justice, I know what comes to mind for a lot of people is the 2000 Julia Roberts film, Erin Brokovich, which is a movie that for a lot of people in the environmental movement sort of turned them on to environmentalism. And it's an interesting movie. It's about a town here in California, a town called Hinckley. It's out in the Mojave Desert, not too far from here. And Hinckley is a town of a couple of thousand people, which is not, it's probably equal to the number of seats in this room. It's a town that was at the time polluted with hexavalent chrome in the groundwater. And I find that really interesting because I live in the city of Paramount. I woke up this morning in our home in Paramount, and I live in a community that is also polluted by hexavalent chromium. We have toxic levels in my hometown. Paramount is an urban industrial area in southeast Los Angeles County. My entire district is an urban industrial area. The former sort of the Cold War was, all the weaponry was built in what is now my district. I have a good friend of mine, John Switalski, who termed out of the Michigan legislature in 2014, and he moved to Los Angeles right afterwards, and I was driving him through my district shortly after he moved to California. And we were driving through Southgate and Linwood, the heart of my district, and he said, "This reminds me of home." It reminded him a lot of Detroit. It reminded him a lot of Michigan, parts of Michigan. And it's a district that, again, is unlike what a lot of people think of when they think of Southern California. It's a district that is not the sort of, you don't see a lot of postcards of Southgate in the gift shop here. You don't see a lot of postcards of Linwood. You don't see a lot of postcards of Bell and of Cudahy. But it helps to remind folks that the problems of environmental problems and environmental justice problems strike not only every part of the United States, but every part of California. The problems that are persistent in my district, in my very urban district, and I have one of the most urban districts in the United States. If you were to get out your smartphone right now, and you were to Google the 100 most densely populated cities in the United States, the Wikipedia list as the 100 most densely populated cities in the United States, 5 of the 50 most densely populated cities in the United States are in my district. 5 of the 50. I have 5 cities that are more densely populated than Chicago and Boston in my district. I have Maywood, which is among the 10 most densely populated cities in the United States. And what's interesting about that is that these are cities that were built as, well, originally as agricultural communities. You didn't want to live in urban Los Angeles in 1919, so you had to go way out to the countryside of Maywood. And so these were communities that were built as sort of farming tracts, and eventually they turned into suburban neighborhoods in the 1940s and 50s, and then eventually the single-family homes were torn down and built into huge concrete sort of cinder block apartments. And a lot of the amenities that we associate with rural living and with suburban living, parks and open spaces, are missing from my community because of the way that they developed. And you see that throughout the state, in urban areas, in rural areas, in inland areas, in coastal areas, in the north of the state and the south of the state, in Democratic regions and in southern and in Republican regions. And I think it's something that every environmental attorney needs to think about, every single one. Every single environmental attorney needs to think about the extent to which environmental problems and environmental justice issues impact every aspect of American, the American reality. And this morning when I woke up, I did what I do every morning, which is I go running, even with my bad knees. And I know a lot of you took a morning run up in the Hollywood Hills. My morning run's a little bit different than running up Runyon Canyon or wherever you were this morning. In my community, when you jog down Paramount Boulevard and up to Rosecrans on the backside to Garfield, most of what you see are trucks. It's a huge industrial areas, lots of trucks, lots of power plants. I see trucks and factories. I don't see trails. I don't see any greenery at all. And it really makes you wonder about the air that I breathe in the morning when I'm running. It makes you think about the air that I breathe every day. And it makes you think about the 4 or 5 schools that I jog past and the air that they breathe. Alf talked about the fact that I ran early childhood education organizations for about 20 years. And in Southern California, a lot of the cheapest land, the land which nonprofit organizations can afford, tend to be along freeways. And we know what kind of air quality exists along freeways. So you start to think about the air quality that children as young as 6 months old to 4 years old in the early childhood education organizations I used to run. You start to wonder about the air that they breathe. And in Southern California, or in California, I should say, we sort of divide ourselves into eastside environmentalists and westside environmentalists. And in California, we're good at a lot of things in California. We're good at tech, we're good at entertainment, we're good at a lot of different things. We're good at higher education. We're not real good at geography. I live closer to the beach than we are right now, and the beach is on the West Coast, and I call myself an Eastside environmentalist for some reason. Eduardo Garcia lives in the South. He lives down in Coachella, down near Palm Springs. He calls himself an Eastside environmentalist. Doesn't make any sense at all. But the way that we sort of dichotomize, the way we sort of think of the East Side environmentalists versus the West Side environmentalists is really the way we think of ourselves throughout the state is really because of the way that the environmental movement sort of started in Los Angeles and the way it, to an extent, continues to exist in Los Angeles. The West Side environmentalists are sort of thought of as the Santa Monica folks, the Malibu folks, West Los Angeles folks, folks in more affluent communities, folks who started to a large extent in the environmental movement in Southern California and should be lauded for those efforts. They should. But there was always this perception that those folks, those quote-unquote West Side environmentalists, didn't really think about what was happening in East Los Angeles, didn't really think about what was happening in Southeast Los Angeles, didn't think about what was happening in some of the less leafy, more industrial parts of the city. And the idea of the East Side environmentalists were sort of developed out of that dichotomy, out of this this divide between these two groups. And the eastside environmentalists are now the group that we sort of think of as environmental justice folks. And again, people like Eduardo Garcia last year, when we passed SB 32, our wonderful, wonderful efforts to re-up our efforts at climate change in California, was this fantastic marriage of Fran Pavley, the ultimate West Side environmentalist, and Eduardo Garcia, the ultimate East Side environmentalists, sort of joining forces and working together to make sure that we had a climate change package that served the entire state, and a climate change package that was going to make sure that all Californians enjoyed the benefits of what we were doing with respect to those efforts. I was there when it happened. We were in Paris at the climate conference, and Ms. Pavley, the ultimate West Side environmentalist, had just tried to re-up her climate change efforts and failed miserably. She fell about 20 votes short of where she needed to be in the assembly. And she asked me what she needed to do in order to make sure that she was successful. And I said, you need to incorporate other folks. California, the environmental movement in California is not what it used to be. The environmental movement in California in 2016, I guess it was December of 16. No, it was December of 15. The environmental movement in the winter of 2015 was not the environmental movement of 1977. And I told her, you need to move east. And we were in Paris at the climate conference, and I brought Eduardo Garcia from Coachella. Very similar community, very similar to mine. Different in that it's very rural, quite rural, south of Palm Springs to the Mexican border, but similar in terms of the demographics of the district, similar in terms of the poverty rates in the district. And Eduardo and Fran sat down and they talked about their common commitment to environmentalism. And I remember Eduardo sort of coming out of that meeting, and he told a group of reporters a couple of months later, he said, I care about polar bears, I really do. He said, but I also care about people. And Eduardo spent the next year going throughout the state and talking to people in their own communities, on their own terms, on their own turf, about what climate change meant in their district. And that distinction between polar bears and people was really, for me, the ultimate sort of bridging of the East Side environmentalists versus the West Side environmentalists. And it led to what I really think is ultimately the best thing that California has ever done, and that was the passage of SB 32 and the re-upping of our climate change efforts. When we think of the West Side, we think of Teslas and hybrids and efforts to reduce fossil fuels through those efforts. On the East Side, the consequences of lack of environmental efforts toward remediating the environment they're not in the newspaper, not something you read. They're actually in our homes, and they're outside of our doors, and it's stuff that you see every day. And I think for a group, I know a lot of you are from out of state or not from Los Angeles, and you're gonna fly out of here today or tomorrow over the course of the next few days. And I want you to do something when you do. I fly into Los Angeles every Thursday, and I fly out of Los Angeles every Sunday. And I fly over the plane. When the plane flies into Los Angeles, it comes over Malibu, and it takes this great sweep over West Los Angeles, down the spine of Wilshire Boulevard, through Koreatown and Pico Union. And if you look to, again, we're bad at geography in California. If you look to the north, you're going to see this really pretty green ribbon. You'll see it starting near Griffith Park, and you'll see this beautiful green ribbon sort of undulating past Dodger Stadium over to Chinatown. And if you look very closely, you'll realize what that is. That's the Los Angeles River. The Los Angeles River has been revitalized throughout the San Fernando Valley, most of the San Fernando Valley. It's been revitalized up to Griffith Park. There's some tremendous efforts to revitalize it near downtown and Chinatown. some great public artwork efforts. The city of Los Angeles recently purchased a huge tract of land there. And when the plane starts to turn over downtown Los Angeles, it gets over the city of Vernon, all these warehouses, and you will immediately see that green ribbon turns into white, this sort of shocking white concrete. That's the Los Angeles River in my district. Where the city of Los Angeles boundary ends is where my district begins. I represent the 7 cities along the Los Angeles River, from the city of Los Angeles boundary to Long Beach. And there is no revitalization of the Los Angeles River. You cannot canoe in my part of the Los Angeles River. You can canoe in Canoga Park, and that's wonderful. We've done that as an office, and it's quite enjoyable. But you can't do that in my part of the Los Angeles River because it's filled with concrete, it's filled with mattresses, it's filled with sofas, and there is no water. And the revitalization of the Los Angeles River, again, ends in East Los Angeles. And I have told people over and over again, there's no beach in East Los Angeles. The Pacific Ocean does not start in East Los Angeles. There's what we call the Forgotten 21 miles of Los Angeles River that continue from the city of Los Angeles boundary to Long Beach, where my district ends, and then magically it turns green again. But the poor industrial, mostly Latino neighborhoods and communities that I represent have not been able to enjoy the revitalization of the river. And for me, that is and I know this is a bad pun, but it's a concrete realization. It is a very real realization of everything that we talk about when we talk about the environmental justice movement versus environmentalism. When we talk about the environmental movement, which has done a wonderful job of raising consciousness about the preservation of open space and forests and our hillsides, and environmental justice, which is starting to gain steam in its efforts to talk about the impact that environmental injustice has on communities, has on schools, school children, has on families, and predominantly has on people of color. The legislature's doing its part. I think we've done a good effort. I talked earlier about SB 32. And what we're doing this year in the California legislature is to make sure that the benefits of our cap and trade system most directly impact those communities that are harmed by air pollution. Communities like my district, communities like the Central Valley, the great farming region of Southern California, communities like the Inland Empire, where we have these tremendous goods movement facilities, mostly rail yards, that help to move about 40% of the goods in your home in Philadelphia, your home in Lincoln, your home in Des Moines. 40% of those goods come from the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach. 40% of those goods come through my district and end up in your living room. But there's a cost in my community. There's a cost of smog caused by the trucks. There's a cost of smog caused by the trains. There's a cost of smog caused by ships that are docked offshore that burn the same clean fuels that we do here in the United States. And it's incumbent upon me as somebody who represents those communities, it's incumbent upon me as the speaker of this state of 38.5 million people, it's incumbent upon me to continue to tell those stories about people in my district, but also to tell those stories about people in other parts of the state who do not have the benefits, who are not benefiting from the environmental movement the way that others have. But it's also incumbent upon you. It's incumbent upon you as environmental attorneys. You also need to step up. We know that this is a very challenging moment in American history, and it's incumbent upon all of us to step up our efforts at this moment. Whomever you represent, whatever the issues are, to whatever extent the environment is involved, there are issues of environmental justice enveloped in those issues. And you had better think about that. you don't want to be Volkswagen. None of you should want to be Volkswagen, and none of your clients should want to be Volkswagen. Injustice turns into administrative action, legal action, or legislative action. You are doing your clients a disservice if you don't discuss environmental justice issues with them. You are doing your clients a disservice if you are not discussing environmental justice issues with them. You know what the demographics of this country look like today. You know what they will look like 20 years from now, and you know what they will look like 40 years from now. This is an issue, I think, that is a moral imperative, but it's also just damn good business for every company in the United States of America, I believe. And if you don't start thinking about these issues, and if your companies don't start thinking about these issues, then we all of a sudden run into the Erin Brokovich problems. There's a scene in the movie, I found this on YouTube, because, again, I like to cheat. There's a scene in Erin Brokovich where corporate attorneys offer a settlement to Erin Brokovich, and she's quite insulted, and I wrote down what she said. These corporate attorneys offer a settlement, and Ms. Brokovich is insulted, and she said, and this could be said for my district, she said, "These people don't dream of being rich. They dream about being able to watch their kids swim in a pool without worrying that they'll have to have a hysterectomy at the age of 20, like Rosa Diaz, a client of ours, or that they'll have a spine deterioration like Stan Bloom, who's another client of ours." She then tells a corporate lawyer that she would figure out what she would expect to be paid for her uterus and multiply it by 100. This is the story of Hinckley, but this is the story of Maywood in my district. It's the story of Bell. It's the story of Cudahy. It's the story of Coachella. But it's also the story of communities in states that you come from. It's a story that's relevant in all 50 states. I ran an early childhood education organization on the big island of Hawaii in Kona for about 13 months. The environmental justice problems on the southwest corner of the big island of Hawaii are every bit as prescient as the problems in my district. If nothing else, they've been ignored longer, and there's less of a sense of consciousness about them. So these issues are everywhere, and these issues are relevant everywhere. And I think it's important that we all think about them. I think about them every day. I don't have a choice. I run through these communities. I live in these communities. I represent these citizens. And I want you to think about them too. You all need to step up. We all need to step up. And you need to start by asking how your clients' actions might affect those folks who are like those who live in my district. And if you don't deal with these problems, if you don't deal with them early, you will deal with them eventually. That's what happened with Volkswagen. Again, don't be a Volkswagen. Don't cut corners. Don't cheat. Ensure that your companies are not going to pay fines later on, that they're not going to be subject to recalls or settlements, because it'll cost their reputation and it'll cost you your reputation. So I want to thank you for all of the work that you do. I know there's a panel to follow that is going to tell stories similar to the stories that exist in my district. I want you to listen to those stories. I had a group of freshman legislators in my office a week ago Monday, and they asked how to be a good legislator. I said, what's the one skill you need in order to be a good legislator? And I said, you need to listen. And I think the same can be said for attorneys as well. The same could be said for environmental attorneys as well. When Alf told the story about me going throughout the state doing 18 water bond hearings, he talked about the fact that we did these hearings in every corner of the state. And what we did throughout those hearings was mostly to just listen. What we did was we listened to people's stories in Kern County and Riverside County and Humboldt County. We listened to people's stories because those stories were really what we were trying to battle. What those stories were really about was what we were trying to address. And the stories that you're going to hear in the panel ahead are equally important and essentially what the environmental justice movement is all about. Thank you.